Hello, everyone. Welcome back from winter break. Hopefully, you guys had a good time. We're starting our next unit, which the first part we're going to talk about today has to do with immigration. And for a lot of you guys, maybe some of the stuff will sound similar because even though what we're talking about is the 1800s and the 1900s, it's still similar sometimes to what's going on today with immigration. And we will be testing on this by the end of the quarter. This is a shorter unit, so really focus on what we're doing. If you have any questions, raise your hand. So, immigration trends. Prior to 1871, most immigrants to America came from Northern and Western Europe, and this included Germany, Great Britain, Ireland, Norway, and Sweden. And most of these immigrants were Protestant. Protestant is it's a type of Christianity. And from 1871 to 1921, immigration changed. We started having immigrants come from Southern and Eastern Europe, and this included Italy, Greece, Poland, Russia, present-day Hungary, and the former Yugoslavia. We also started to have immigrants come from Asia, mainly China and Japan. And most of the immigrants that came during this time were Catholic, Orthodox, or Jewish. So Orthodox, it's a type of Christianity as well, just like Catholicism. Catholic is a type of Christianity. And this is what most of them were. Not all of them, but most of them from 1871 to 1921 were either Catholic, Orthodox, or Jewish. So as you can tell, before 1871, they were from the north, which is up, or the western part of Europe. However, after 1871, they were from southern or Eastern Europe. And just like what we keep learning about in this class, probably just like what it's like today as well, immigrants came to America seeking freedom and better lives for their families. Some places in Europe were strict. You could only be one religion. They had kings. People didn't vote, and lives weren't very good, so they wanted to move here. And the impact on immigrants. So immigrants made valuable contributions to the dramatic industrial growth of America. So remember, during the 1800s, the United States, we're doing very, very well. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We did have the Civil War, but only the South was hurt after the Civil War. Remember, the southern states, the Confederacy, they were poor, they had no money, but in the western United States, the Midwest, the Northeast, America was making a lot of money. Immigrants were a big part of that, and they contributed to the industrial growth. Remember, industrial, that's like where they have factories, people are making things, and the Chinese workers helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, which this is down here, the railroad that went across the United States, and Slavs, Italians, and Poles worked in the coal mines of the East. So here's a coal mine right here, and they would work on the East. And immigrants worked in textile and steel mills in the Northeast, as well as the clothing industry in New York City. Textile, that's just pretty much clothing. And immigrants worked for very low pay and endured dangerous working conditions to help build the nation's industrial growth. So because there were so many immigrants and they all needed jobs, company owners would pay them very, very little. Because if the immigrant didn't take the money, someone else would take that job. So they were offered very low wages, and they often had dangerous working conditions. Back then, there was really no protection. Jobs were very, very dangerous, and they liked to employ kids a lot, which you see in this picture, because kids had small fingers, so their fingers were able to fit in these holes. So adults weren't able to work a lot of these jobs. They needed kids to put their fingers in all these places, but it was very dangerous. People usually worked 16 hours a day. Sometimes you were only allowed 2 breaks. You weren't even allowed to use the restroom. So it was very, very strict. And if you got up and used the restroom, they would usually just fire you because there were so many immigrants, they would get another one to come in. And here's some of the jobs that they would have. Here's, once again, some children working. These machines would go up and down, and it was dangerous because if their hand got stuck, they would lose their hand, or break a finger, break an arm. It happened a lot. They also worked on skyscrapers. And as you notice, there's no rope or anything. This guy, if he fell off, he would die. And that did happen sometimes. And here's an immigrant working in a coal mine. So he's in a cave, he's digging. And this is a very dangerous job, especially back then. Lots of times the caves would collapse. And early life in America. Immigrants from Europe entered America through Ellis Island and New York Harbor. Their first view of America was often the Statue of Liberty from Ellis Island. So these immigrants are on Ellis Island right now, and the first thing they usually saw was the Statue of Liberty. And this is the Statue of Liberty, in case you've never seen it before. It's in New York City, and it's of a woman. She's holding a flame. And this is Ellis Island. So if you're an immigrant and you're coming from Europe, this is where you went. Ellis Island is right here. It's where it has these buildings and has these 4 little pointy things. So that's where they would go. They would process you. But just about every single immigrant who came from Europe went to Ellis Island. And this is the Statue of Liberty. It's in the background. That's usually the first thing they would see. And immigrants began the process of assimilation, which is learning a new culture, into what was termed the American melting pot. A place where there's many cultures and ethnicities while settling in ethnic neighborhoods and growing cities. So we still see this, ethnic neighborhoods. That's where, if you go down the street, you can say Colmore is an ethnic neighborhood. Most of the people who live in Colmore are from El Salvador. There's nothing wrong with that. That would just be considered an ethnic neighborhood. And New York or America was like that back in the 1800s as well. There was Italian neighborhoods, there was Irish neighborhoods, there was Chinese neighborhoods. However, America is called a melting pot because it's a place where many cultures and ethnicities exist. It's like that today. If I go down the street, there's going to be a Mexican restaurant. I can find a Chinese restaurant. I can find Japanese restaurants, Vietnamese restaurants, Salvadorian restaurants, because we have so many cultures in one spot. It's a melting pot. We have many cultures and ethnicities. And immigrants and their children worked hard to learn English, American customs, and become American citizens. Public schools served an essential role in assimilating immigrants to America. So this is similar to today as well. You guys have been working hard to learn English. You've learned lots of customs. And maybe one day your guys' goals become citizens. And public schools, once again, they serve an important role with that because we're here, we teach you guys, you get a free education, which is nice. However, the bad side is what started to happen is there began to be resentment towards immigrants. Resentment is kind of like where you don't like someone. And immigrants were exploited by urban political machines that provided useful services in exchange for immigrant votes. And this increased animosity towards them. So these political machines, they would give immigrants things they would need like health care, maybe dental care, but what they wanted was their votes. And resentment towards immigrants continued. So although immigrants made valuable contributions to building America, they often faced hardships and hostility. And fear and resentment was based on the idea that immigrants would take jobs for lower pay than American workers would accept. So there were a lot of Americans during this time that felt that maybe immigrants would take the same job that they have, but they would work for less money. So that built resentment. And there was also prejudice. People didn't like that a lot of these immigrants were lots of times different religions. There was a lot that came in that were Catholic. A lot of Americans weren't Catholic during this time, but then we started getting lots of Catholic immigrants, and cultural differences. They ate different food, they spoke a different language, and just the culture itself was different. This is what started to happen. You can see a lot of these signs. So companies would say help wanted. They were looking to help, but they didn't like Irish people, so no Irish need apply. Here's a sign that says no dogs in Chinese allowed. So they're almost saying Chinese are the same as dogs. Here's an ad for a job, and right here, it's hard to see, but it says no Italians allowed, so Italian people were discriminated against. And here's an ad as well right here. It says they're looking for a barber, someone who cuts hair, and they're telling people to apply. But if you look down here, it says no German need apply. So they didn't want anybody from Germany. So there was a lot of resentment towards immigrants in parts of the United States. And this led Congress to limit immigration through the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. And these laws effectively cut off most immigration to America for the next several decades. So it used to be the United States, we would take tons and tons of immigrants. There was no limits. If you came here, you were going to get in. There was, unless you were sick or you had a criminal record. But after these two things, it was very difficult for people to come here. First one we'll talk about is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. We actually banned Chinese from entering the country. So literally no Chinese were allowed in the country. So if a boat from China was coming to the United States, they would stop it, tell it to go back to China. They weren't allowing anybody. We did allow the Chinese who were already here to stay, but they were not allowed to become citizens. And this is a political cartoon during that time, and it shows Uncle Sam, and he's kicking the Chinese out. That's what he's doing, and it was kind of racist, because Chinese people do not look like this, but that's what the newspapers used to draw pictures of Chinese people as. The other important one that still affects people today is the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. And this started limiting how many immigrants were allowed in the United States, and also gave a quota, which a quota is a limit, on how many people were allowed from each country. This law greatly reduced the amount of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. So remember, after 1871, most immigrants were coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. But what this did is it said, oh, you know what, Italy can only have 1,000 people come. France is allowed to have 2,000, but it gave a limit, so only so many people from each country were able to go. And this is a political cartoon that they had, and it shows, you see all these people from Europe wanted to come to the United States, but we were only allowing so many people. That's why there's just a tiny opening, but a lot of people were trying to come in, and it's still like that today. We have a lot of people from certain countries trying to come to the United States, while other countries, there really isn't that many people trying to come to the United States. But this law makes it so only so many people from each country can come in. And because of that, we still have a lot of immigration in the United States, and it's gone back up over time, but it still wasn't what it was during like the 1870s, 1880s, essentially after the Emergency Quota Act. That's when immigration really started to decline. All right, that's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, remember, the test is coming up probably in about 2 to 3 weeks, so make sure you understand this material.